When I'd hear Saudis talked about, I'd say, they don't correspond to the Saudis I know. Or when I'd hear Palestinians talked about, I'd say, that's not the experience I had living in camps, or the people I met in the West Bank, or the folks I met in Jerusalem. So I've wanted to tell these stories and introduce Americans to some of the people I've met. And I got the chance to do it, but I got to do more than that, because I also got to share some polling. You know, we don't know the Arab world because we never listened to the Arab world. When you don't listen, you don't understand. If you don't listen, no one's ever going to hear you, because no one's going to pay attention to you, because you're not talking to them or with them, you're talking at them. We tend to do that in our foreign policy. We tend to do that in our diplomacy, is we talk at 4,000 Arabs. We talk to 4,000 people from Morocco to Iraq. We organize every answer they give us. We pay attention to them and respect them. And we organize them by country, by gender, by age. And we put it together and look at it. And not only look at it, but we actually pay attention and listen to them. And what they're telling us, it's almost like opening a window and hearing 4,000 voices talking to you and telling you, this is what's important to us. This is what matters in my life. This is what I think about most often. These are the things I value and the things I don't value. This is what I want. And I've been doing it now for over a decade in the Middle East, and I've learned something. What I've learned is that the stories that I know fit the numbers and the hard data that I have. When we poll here in America, we say, why are Arabs upset with us? 80% of Americans say, because they hate our values. 80% of Americans say that Arabs hate our values. When we poll in the Arab world, 65% of Arabs like our values. 60+% like our people. 60+% like our movies and our culture in general. 70-something% like our education, and on and on and on. What they don't like is how we treat them. They don't like our policies in Iraq or in Palestine, or how we treat Arabs and Muslims who come to visit, etc., etc. I mean, but if we don't listen, then we end up, well, you know, they hate our values. And it gets thrown around like it's common sense. I mean, everybody knows they hate our values. Well, no, they don't hate our values. One guy told me, he said, you know, after we do the polling, we do personal interviews to sort of, you know, get some anecdote to amplify the the storyline. He said, the impression is, we don't like you. He said, we actually do like you, but what we're convinced of is that you don't like us. And it's because of the way you treat us. He said, we actually love you, but we feel like jilted lovers, because it's not repaid. And so when you listen, you learn. You learn something about maybe what's going wrong, and maybe what you can do to fix it and make it better, without thinking at all, and without listening. We don't listen, and so we don't know. And the problem is that we can't be there anymore because it's too important. Think about it. Since the end of Vietnam, a long time ago, but since the end of Vietnam, we sent more money, we sent more weapons, we sent more troops. We've fought more wars and lost more lives in the Middle East than anywhere else in the world. And we still have more troops there in active combat role than anywhere else in the world, and yet we don't know the place. I mean, we went into Iraq, a country we knew almost nothing about, and still do know nothing about. Sent 100,000+ of our young men and women into a country whose culture, history, we knew nothing of at all. And we were going to remake that country and make it into a democracy. National Geographic did a survey a month before the war. They found 11% of the American people could find Iraq on a map. In 2009, the same survey was done again. Numbers shot up to 37% could find it on a map, which means we lost at that point 4,000 lives in a country where 37% of our people could find it. 60% of the American people think Iran is an Arab country. Same number almost think that Pakistan is an Arab country. Only about a third know the year that Israel fought its war of independence. I mean, the amount we don't know fills books, and the reason why it fills books is because they're the books that aren't being used in our schools. Because we do not learn about the Middle East in our schools. 2,400 four-year college and universities in America, and only 300 of them have Middle East, teach Arabic at all. Teach Arabic at all. Only 60 of them have Middle East studies programs. Only 60 Middle East studies programs in the entire United States of America. 300 teach Arabic. 3 times as many kids study Japanese than study Arabic. More study ancient Greek than study Arabic. We don't fear ancient Greeks. And so maybe the need To know or not know is not as great. Like I'm saying, it's great that our kids are studying foreign languages. But the reason they're not studying Arabic is because the opportunities aren't there, because the teachers aren't there. And the teachers aren't there because they haven't been trained in the last generation. We live in an interdisciplinary and interconnected world, but we don't understand it and learn it, and therefore don't appreciate it, and so it becomes us versus them, and them we don't need to know. Because they didn't do anything for us anyway, except maybe some oil now and then. The problem with not knowing is that you then become yourself ripe for exploitation. And they become ripe for objectification and demonization. If you don't see them as real people, then anything goes. And if you don't know anything about them, then anybody can come and pull your chain and get you to do anything. Like tell you things as if, 6 days and we'll be out of there. And it's over. And 6 months and the troops will be home and it'll only cost $2 billion. And you know what? There's going to be flowers in the street, and there's going to be a beacon lighting the whole Middle East, and they're going to greet us as liberators. And we believed it, because we didn't know a damn thing. I remember when they were walking down the streets of Baghdad, a reporter called me and he said, "This is like World War II, isn't it?" And I said, "No, that's how we see it. Because we didn't know, therefore we saw it through the prism that we did know. And the only prism we knew was World War II. So we either judge everything. We judge everything as Americans either through the prism of World War II or Vietnam. Oh, this is going to be Vietnam. If it's working, oh, this is going to be like Germany. If it's not working, oh, this is Vietnam. And those are the two things we see everything through. They also see history and life through a prism. But for them, we were the liberators coming to free them from the Germans. And for us, and for them, we were the Mongols. When I said that to the reporter, we're like the Mongols, he said, "What do they have to do with this?" And I said, it was the Mongols who first sacked Baghdad. They were the ones who first destroyed the city and occupied it. They're looking at us as the new Mongols. Oh, he said. I mean, how do you get the story? How do you get to write the story if you don't know the history? Our reporters write stories as if the story began the day they got the assignment. But it didn't. It began in history. And you have to know the history. But we don't. And if we spent so much money and lost so many lives and fought so many battles and have so much at risk and we don't know a thing about it, then we don't know how to understand what's going on. We didn't learn this stuff in school. And what we didn't learn in school, what we did learn was in the popular culture that communicated mythologies. Stereotypes like Arabs are terrorists or Arabs are oil sheikhs. They're the only images on television or in the movies or in popular. If you're a kid watching cartoon shows, that's what you're seeing. Now, are there Arabs who are terrorists? Of course there are. Are there Arabs who are oil sheikhs? Of course there are. But there's no character on television show Ahmed who gets up in the morning and delivers 2 babies and then comes back to the hospital he's not a storyline. Arabs who do the ordinary and the everyday, real people who could round out the image, because we didn't get it in school, we need to get it in popular culture, but they're not there. So the only image we get is the stereotype, and that becomes then knowledge for us. Most people walk around with this received knowledge and think that's reality. And what comes through the popular culture then gets reinforced by the political culture. Because it's one thing to just receive it as sort of, these are characters and they're Arabs. And it's another thing to have Newt Gingrich tell you, this is what they're really like. Or Sarah Palin tell you, this is what the Arabs are like, or the Muslims are like. Because what politicians do is create certitude. When we started polling on this particular question I'm going to tell you about, was about 3 months after 9/11, we asked Americans, do you know enough about Arabs, or do you need to know more? 75% said, I don't know enough, I need to know more. Today that number has dropped down to about 50%, which means half the American public now thinks they know enough and don't need to know more. Can't find a rock on a map, but I know enough and I don't need to know more. Now, the weird thing is, and the very disturbing thing, is that there's a partisan divide on this. It's not just 50-50, it's also 50-50. 73% of Democrats say, I don't know enough, I need to know more. 82% of Republicans say, I know enough, I don't need to know anymore. Do you respect Muslims? 34% of Democrats say yes. I'm sorry, 54% of Democrats say yes. 54% say yes. 34% say no. Among Republicans, 12% say yes. 85% say no. Is Islam a religion of peace? 60-something% of Democrats say it is. 70-something% of Republicans say it is not. It's a religion of hate. I mean, we have a deep divide here on this. And we've gone from not knowing to thinking we know to absolutely certain I know. Not knowing is one thing, but not knowing and thinking you know, that's something else. And that's kind of dangerous, I think. Because you act on that. And when you act on that, you make huge mistakes because you just didn't know. And so what I try to do is look at the consequences of this accumulated mythology, the accumulated mythologies that have come to us through popular culture or through the political culture. And therefore the mythologies we have, or the stereotypes, the great myths we have about Arabs. One of them is that they're all the same. Because Arabs are very different, but there are some ties that bind, and that actually fuse them together as a common culture. Number one, it's a language. And having a common language doesn't just mean, oh, they all started the same language. It means that there are forces in history that shape them as a people that share certain events and certain values that come through that language and come through that common history. And that in itself creates a tie that binds. I mean, when Nasser used to speak, his speeches were listened across the world, in the then Arab world. And today, we complain about Al Jazeera, but it's listened everywhere. And people don't understand Palestine. They call it an obsession. It is not an obsession. It is a defining existential issue that almost creates this Arab identity and cannot be dismissed as some writers in the West want to do. I mean, Palestine is, I call it in my book, the wound that never healed. In some ways, what it is that when things are happening to Palestinians, Arabs feel it's happening to them. It's as if happening to them reminds Arabs of their own vulnerability, their own sense of loss, their own ability to control their own destiny, their own sense of betrayal by the West. They care about their own people. When we ask Arabs across the region, why does Palestine mean something to you? They say it's because it's Arabs like us. It's happening to Arabs like us. And Iraq has become the same kind of thing. It was a wound. It was a wound that actually did not have to occur. It happened, and it hurt, and it continues to hurt. We looked at Abu Ghraib because we did it. They looked at Abu Ghraib and saw it happening to people like them. And that will stay for a long time as a wound that won't close. There are other myths. One myth is the Arabs are all angry. They sit at home at night and they go to bed at night thinking about hating America, and they wake up in the morning hating Israel and spend the day in the mosque listening to a preacher who makes them hate even more. And if they're not doing that, they're watching Al Jazeera, and that's even making them hate even more. What are the things that mean most in your life? Number one is jobs. And number two is, education, and then healthcare, and their families. Sound familiar? Because they're people. They're just like us. And the things that matter to us matter to them. The things that matter to them are the things that matter to us. So, the only picture we see is, so it's like the only thing we know is that they're angry. We don't know them as people. We don't see it in popular culture. Certainly doesn't make it through our political culture, and it never even makes it through our news. There is no human interest story in the Arab world. Even the demonstrations in Cairo did not come through as they were. We didn't know how funny they were. We didn't know that Tahrir Square ended up looking like, like a Woodstock. There were dancers, there were musicians, there were poetry readings. I mean, it was a celebration more than anything, and very disciplined, and we didn't know it. The problem is that, so we get this thing about they're angry because that's the only one we see, just like my poor neighbor. The only Philadelphia story you saw was people shooting each other, so it's safer to go to Cairo. Somebody asked me yesterday, they said, I got tickets to go to Cairo this summer. I don't think I should go. Do you? I said, sure you should. It's going to be great. He said, but it's dangerous. I said, it's actually safer than Miami Beach. I mean, less people get murdered in Cairo than in Miami Beach. Come on. But if you don't know, then you live in a world of myth and stereotype, and that's the world that's all you know. We end up thinking that Iraq will work. We end up thinking that if a little more force is used by the Israelis, the Palestinians will finally get the message and stop, or that if the solution to Lebanon is just pummeling the hell out of them one more time. Or we think that, if only these people would reform, we'd be able to fix them up, and they ought to probably listen to us because we're the reformers. And why isn't President Obama doing more to spread reform and whatever? As if they want our reform, as if they want us. They're doing a pretty good job on their own right now. But if you don't know, you make mistakes. and therefore there are foreign policy blunders that have cost us dearly because we have made mistakes not knowing the culture, the people, and their needs. But you have to read up on this. You have to be looking at what they're saying. And it's not, we're no longer living in a world where, he's really good on the economy. I mean, the rest of the stuff doesn't matter. Because the rest of the stuff does matter. It is life and death stuff. And it matters. And Arab voices do matter for something.